carrier's night deck breathed with steel and salt. Red lights pulsed across the wet surface, shadows stretching long under the hum of turbines waiting for dawn sorties. Laughter cut through the roar, the sharp kind sailors used when they smelled weakness. At the rail, they formed a circle. In the middle stood Lieutenant Rachel Donovan, wetsuit zipped, jaw locked tight. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. One shove came sudden, and she stumbled backward into the black. Too soft, too small. Can't swim with sharks, someone jeered as she vanished over the edge. The ocean swallowed her whole black, endless, merciless. On deck, it was entertainment. Beneath the waves, it was different. The water already had owners. Seals. And they were watching. Rachel's arms cut through the surge, lungs steady, body flowing like she'd been born with gills. She broke the surface with calm defiance, climbed back up the ladder, and met their smirks with silence. The laughter died a little too quickly. What they didn't know, Rachel had 2 minutes when it counted. 2 minutes to prove that competence weighs more than mockery. She had done it before, and the ocean had already marked her. But on this ship, no one believed it yet. Not until the night came when steel snapped, a sailor's life slipped toward the deep, and the woman they called Minnow moved faster than luck itself. Before that moment, she was just a joke. After it, the SEAL commander would rise to his feet, lift his hand, and salute, and the entire deck would fall silent. Subscribe now for true valor stories, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Born and raised in Norfolk, Virginia, Rachel had lived with salt in her lungs long before the Navy stitched her name to a uniform. Her father worked at the shipyard, steel dust and grease in his palms. He'd point at carriers sliding across the horizon and say, "Those hulls don't float without people like me or people like them." By 15, she was the fastest swimmer in her high school, slicing water like she had gills. College recruiters offered scholarships. She turned them all down. She wanted service, not trophies. She wanted the Navy. Rescue swimmer school was designed to break people. Hours of drown-proofing, underwater knot drills, carrying limp bodies through surf until shoulders screamed. Instructors muttered that Rachel was too light, too lean, too small. But she pushed through every evolution. She graduated scarred and exhausted. But she graduated. The scar was still on her shoulder, a jagged souvenir from a storm off Virginia when she pulled 2 fishermen from a capsized trawler. Debris tore into her, left her bloodied, stitched, and silent. She didn't brag. For Rachel, scars weren't stories. They were reminders. But her call sign told a story she hadn't chosen. Minnow. It started during a brutal underwater drill. She surfaced gasping, and a larger sailor laughed. "She looks like a minnow in a bucket." The meme stuck. To her peers it meant weak, delicate, out of place. It was supposed to be funny. It turned into habit. Over time, even camaraderie used it, but always with an edge. On the carrier's deck, Rachel stood out by discipline, not by demand. Helmet clipped, boots aligned, uniform squared away. While others slouched in line, she stayed at parade rest, eyes forward. When a recruit fumbled, she was the one to lean down and steady him. That kindness made younger sailors look to her. But to peers, it was proof she was too soft. At dawn muster, she found a cartoon taped to her locker. A bug-eyed fish with Minnow in block letters. She peeled it off carefully, folded it like it was hazardous, and tucked it into her pocket. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. Just folded and moved on. In the chow line, 2 petty officers kept their voices just loud enough to travel. "She swims fast straight into the kiddie pool. Hope the lifeguard's ready." Rachel stared forward. Steel tray. Kicked offie. Anchors against the current. Later, she approached the operations desk with her request memorized. "Sir, I'm putting my name in for tomorrow's high sea state drill." The petty officer didn't look up. "You're off that." "Notes say." "I know what the notes say," she said softly. "Send it up anyway." He glanced at her, tired more than cruel. "Why bang on a locked door, ma'am?" Because the lock won't change if no one tests it, she said. He sent it. Approval never came. That night, she trained alone. At 0202 in the morning, the pool was empty. Lights shimmered on the surface like hammered glass. She tied knots underwater by feel, untying them blind until her fingers ached. 50-meter fin swims burned her legs. Shallow water drills pressed her lungs into fire. She worked until her shoulders trembled. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. A sailor passed her in the corridor, glanced at her wet hair, and smirked. Training for kiddie pool championships? She let the words fall behind her. Day stacked on day, more cartoons on her locker. More whispers at chow, more denials from chiefs. Each one folded and stored, a quiet archive she carried with her. One morning she finally confronted a chief. Request to be added to the Joint SEAL drill, Chief. He gave her a look, half pity, half annoyance. You're not fit. We need the fastest, strongest, most resilient. You need a rescue swimmer, she said. That's me. You're good, he said, voice careful. But you'd drown in a real op, and I won't sign the paperwork that gets you killed. The words cut sharper than a wave. She saluted, jaw tight, and walked away. That night, she returned to the pool. Alone, she worked knots until her hands blistered, 50 meters in one breath. Treading with 50 pounds until her muscles screamed. And when exhaustion bent her, she whispered the truth she had always carried. The ocean doesn't weigh character. It weighs competence. Wind rattled the carrier. Waves smashed steel. Rachel Donovan kept swimming. The storm arrived like a fist closing around the ship. The carrier leaned into it, groaning as steel met waves, spray flung high into the air before crashing down again. The deck tilted just enough to unsettle boots, just enough to remind every man and woman that the ocean never asked permission. A simple drill had been scheduled: shift, secure, resecure. Nothing heroic on paper, just moving gear before the next squall line erased visibility. But storms write their own rules. Rachel wasn't on the roster. She never was anymore. Chiefs made sure of that. But she was there anyway, assigned to stage equipment, her hands moving with precision, her eyes scanning the edges. Rescue swimmers live on edges, where routine births emergencies. The first gust announced itself by flinging a tarp skyward. Sailors swore, scrambled, pinned it down. For a moment it looked handled. Then the second gust hit harder. A steel cable, stretched to its working limit, snapped with a sound like a verdict. The broken end whipped across the deck, struck a sailor in the leg, and sent him sliding toward the rail. The red lights blinked their warning at the lip, but the ocean didn't wait. Its black teeth opened wide. Rachel was already moving. Her boots found traction where others slipped. Her body cut a line through rain and spray. "Hold!" she shouted, voice edged with command. She dove, gloves closing on the sailor's harness, her other hand finding his belt. His slide stopped with a jolt that wrenched her shoulders, but she absorbed it, gritting down. Another cable shifted, snarling in the wind. Sailors shouted, scrambled. Rachel pulled the injured man upright. His eyes were wide, whites flashing in the storm. "Breathe," she ordered. "With me. In. Out." Her voice was steady, practiced, the voice of someone who had done this too many times to waste a heartbeat. Two crewmen rushed over. Rachel thrust the sailor toward them. Behind the stack. Now. They moved, not because of her rank, but because authority bleeds out of competence when it matters most. The whipping cable swung again, hunting for another victim. Rachel turned into it. Rescue swimmers don't hesitate. They calculate and act in the same breath. She lunged, caught the line at its arc, boots skidding until her stance locked solid. It dragged her half a step before she bled the energy into the deck, muscles burning. A petty officer dove in beside her, hands grabbing further down. "I've got it." "On three," Rachel said. "Uno, dos, three." Spanish slid out of her instinctively, the language she had trained in when panic wore a different uniform. Together they hauled, walking the cable's fury into a smaller circle until clamps arrived. Metal bit metal. The deck exhaled. Only then did the world unmute. Engines hummed. Sailor shouted. The rescued man vomited between his boots, then straightened, ashamed. Rachel knelt instantly, gloves pressing to his leg. Pain anywhere else? Spins, lights, just the leg, he stammered. She found the bruise, nodded. Copy. Stay with me. A chief appeared, eyes flicking over the scene. Who moved first? He barked. It's handled, someone muttered. His gaze found Rachel. Admiration flickered, then vanished. Get him checked. And keep your lane. The last 3 words dropped heavy. The medics hustled the injured man away. Rain pelted harder, wind pressing the ship like a bully's hand. A sailor nearby tried on sincerity. Nice grab. Lucky swing. Yeah, another added quickly. Right place, right time. Rachel didn't argue. She knew the truth. Luck doesn't rig clamps in sequence or choose the right second to intercept a moving cable. But letting them call it luck kept them comfortable. So she let them. Back in the locker bay, she peeled off soaked gloves. The smell of salt and iron clung to her skin. A petty officer hovered in the doorway. Solid work out there, he said, awkward. It's the job, Rachel replied, not looking up. He hesitated, then muttered, Chief says you weren't on the roster. Said it like it proved something. Rachel glanced at him. What did it prove? He shifted, embarrassed by his own answer. That paper can't get wet. Then he vanished into rain. That night she spread her secret pouch of cartoons on her rack. Fish drawings, kitty floats, jokes, and marker. A chronological archive of ridicule. She tapped them into a neat stack, slid them away. Not trophies, not wounds. Proof she had endured. At 0404 in the morning, she was back in the pool. Fins on, stopwatch set, body sliding under silver water. 50 meters. One breath. 50 meters again. Her chest burned, her arms trembled, but she stayed until she believed her body more than her doubt. When she walked the corridors dripping wet, 2 sailors taped a new cartoon to the wall. This one had speech bubbles. Too soft, too small. Rachel met their eyes, gave the faintest nod, and walked on. Not approval, not defeat, just acknowledgement. She would not break for them. Later that day she requested to join another evolution. The answer was no again, delivered with a shrug, as casual as passing salt. By evening, the ship was rolling heavy. Voices shouted louder to be heard over the gusts. Rachel walked the catwalk alone, spray beating her face, salt in her lungs. She thought of her father's cracked hands, her mother's prayers, the fisherman she had once dragged from the surf who wept in gratitude. She also thought of the chief's certainty, you'd drown in a real op. She whispered the truth back into the storm. The ocean doesn't weigh character, it weighs competence. The carrier heaved beneath her, shouldering the weather. Rachel steadied herself, squared her jaw, and kept moving. By morning the storm limped off, leaving the carrier rinsed and raw. Water threaded down scuppers in bright runnels. The air tasted like wet steel and spent effort. Rachel stood near the gear cage with her bag at her boots, rewrapping tape around her wrists the way boxers ritualize their hands before a fight. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The checklists lived in her bones. Inside the bag, folded flatter than paper should fold, lay the map she never showed. Its edges had been pulped by brine and time until the chart breathed like old canvas. Not the big blue of open ocean, but brown, twisting veins, tributaries webbed with pencil lines and tight notes in Spanish that read like reminders more than secrets. Corriente cambia con luna, nado con equipo completo, 6 minutos. She had added those words at a small metal desk in a plywood room, half a world from any carrier words meant to teach panic how to hold still. A recruit fumbled a harness clip at morning checks, fingers shaking with leftover storm and sleeplessness. Rachel stepped in without ceremony, guiding his hands, voice low. Look at me. One clip. Breathe. Good. He found the latch and color crept back into his face. "Gracias," he blurted, surprising himself. Rachel's mouth twitched. "Y nada." She stepped away before gratitude built a story of its own. By noon, the jokes had changed temperature. There weren't as many. Those that floated up died faster, like sparks falling into wet rope. The locker door that had been a bulletin board for cartoons wore only salt crystals now, no tape, no pen ink. Absence is louder than noise. She noticed it and let it pass. On the catwalk, the junior sailor she'd studied days earlier matched her stride. He glanced at her taped wrist, then away, then back again, because curiosity is a tide. "Ma'am?" he asked, testing if the word would land. She nodded. He swallowed. "Yesterday, how did you know when to meet the cable?" she considered. He expected talk of angles and wind. She gave him the truth. "You feel for the rhythm, not the swing." The answer made his brow furrow the way good answers do. He nodded, filed it, walked on. During maintenance lull, she checked webbing and buckles, running fingertips stage by stage, trusting touch more than she trusted light. The tape at her wrist lifted at the edge. She pressed it down. For a heartbeat the skin showed, 3 small tines, sun-bleached and stubborn, more memory than ink. Then it vanished again under cloth. A boatswain's mate passing by stalled a fraction, as if the air had thickened. He didn't comment. Some things you see before you know what you're seeing. In the hangar bay, 2 line handlers spooled cable and traded rumors with their hands as much as their mouths. "Thought I saw something on Donovan's wrist," one said. The other kept the spool turning. "A scratch," he said too quickly. They both watched her anyway, the way you watch an eddy in a current you thought you understood. She unrolled the map to check a waypoint she had no official reason to check. Rivers are different teachers than seas. A petty officer drifted close, casual as a probe. "Where's that?" he asked, chin tilting at the hand-drawn bends. "Practice routes," she said, already folding the paper so the most dangerous part disappeared. "Currents are a better teacher than we are." He laughed, but the sound had a wobble in it, like a line under load. In Chow, more, the sailor she'd stopped from going over limped in with a bandage under his pant leg. He sat across from her without asking permission and ate quietly. When he finished, he lifted his eyes. "Thank you," he said. Not loud, not performative. Just the weight of a thing that could have gone the other way. Rachel nodded once. "That's the job." He looked relieved that she hadn't tried to turn it into a speech they both would have had to carry. The ship's rumor engine jogged to life again, but the syntax had changed. Less certainty, more questions. Lucky swing had softened into timing, and timing is a cousin of training whether people admit it or not. She kept moving, the way water does when you stop staring at it. Late afternoon brought new air through the hatch, charged, intentional. You can feel when men walk who are fluent in a place you think you know. A small SEAL detachment stepped into the bay, moving with that relaxed economy that looks like arrogance until you've done enough hard work to recognize fluency. Heads lifted. Shirts straightened. Even the casual voices trimmed their ends. They greeted chiefs, shook with the XO, spoke in the shorthand of weather and timings. The one at the middle tall, hawk-eyed, the kind of calm that makes a room check itself, took in the bay like a swimmer reads a rip, once through, and he knew where the trouble would hide. Word traveled on the same frequency as posture, Commander Briggs. No one had to say it twice. Rachel didn't look up at first. She was rewrapping tape, smoothing the edge that had lifted with a thumbnail press. The tape peeled back for an instant, and the trident ghosted the light. It wasn't the crisp billboard kind, all shine and story. It was sea-worn, the afterimage of a river that doesn't forgive. She flexed. Cloth covered it again. Briggs stopped mid-step. It wasn't dramatic. No music in the pause. Just a breath that didn't finish. The room felt it before they found the reason. Conversations misfired. Tools hovered. Muscle memory asked a new question. Rachel sensed the tilt and lifted her chin. Their eyes met his, steady, hers, neutral, with the practiced calm of someone who has lived on the wrong end of a judgment for a long time. He wasn't glancing. He was seeing. She realized it and didn't look away. He closed the distance one step, then half a step more. Up close you could hear the thread in his voice that speaks only when it has to. "Lieutenant," he said. She answered the way steel answers a tap from a trained hand. "Sir." The hatch clanged somewhere far away. No one moved. His chin tipped at her wrist like a question that had already earned its yes. "Where did you earn that?" No rank, no theater, just the clean ask. Her throat worked once, the old reflex, the one that keeps quiet safe, pushed up first. She let it pass and reached instead for the sentences she'd written on herself with miles of muddy water. "Embedded rescue swimmer, sir. Joint ops training rotation. Riverine support." The words landed square. You could feel people move mental furniture to make room for them. Briggs didn't blink. "Which river?" There are questions that test memory. This one tested fluency. "Helmand," she said. No decoration. Corridor work. Brown water. Low light. Something unbuttoned behind his face. Recognition without romance. He looked through her a beat, toward mudbanks and reed lines and the way sound changes when the night sits on moving water. The nearest seals stilled, not frozen like statue work, but tuned like strings you can hear with your chest. The loud chief, the one who knew paperwork better than people, stood very straight and very quiet. A sheet of paper is a fine thing until it gets wet. You could hear logic trying to find a towel. "Unit?" Briggs asked. "Embedded out of bastion. Detachment work." They called when the jetty turned to mud and the current pretended to be ground. She said it like you say the name of a family member you don't need to explain to anyone who's met them. "You work the bends?" he asked, the unteachable part of the river living under the words. "Yes, sir. Where the river tells lies." She didn't smile. He didn't either, but agreement tightened his jaw. A sailor couldn't help himself. "Sir, she caught the snap line yesterday, kept more from going over." Briggs's eyes didn't leave Rachel. "I assumed someone did," he said, and something like dry humor moved through the sentence. "It tends to be her." The chief found his throat. "Commander, if I'd known." Briggs turned his head an inch, enough to be kind and final in the same motion. "You didn't," he said. "You do now." That was all. Paper learned a new shape. Silence laid itself out neatly. It wasn't awkward. It was recalibration. Men and women moved things around inside themselves to match the room that actually existed. "You kept it quiet," he said to Rachel, not accusing. "Didn't feel relevant," she answered. "Work is work." She didn't look down. "Relevant to whom?" he asked, soft and wry. "To the water," she said. "And to whoever's in it." He breathed out once, a short line. Still speaking the dialect, he said, mostly to himself, and some of the seals let the corner of their mouths acknowledge a memory that had been waiting for its cue. Moore stood in the hatch with a medic, and tried not to look like a man who had seen something in himself change shape. The junior sailor who had seen the trident first straightened, pride blooming the way it does when you realize you recognize the truth before the crowd. Briggs pitched his voice to carry without pushing. "We're running the joint evolution in an hour," he said to the chiefs. "I want Donovan on the water component." The XO started to form the word paperwork, and Briggs saved everyone time. "Paperwork can learn to swim," he said. No laugh. "A spine, though." He looked back at Rachel's taped wrist. "You going to keep hiding that?" "It reminds me who I answer to," she said. "The symbol. The tide." He weighed the line and nodded once. "Fair." He turned for the hatch. "Brief in 15, he called. Then, without looking back, "And somebody update the roster before the ocean does it for you." Boots moved. Air moved. The ship exhaled. Rachel tightened her tape, lifted her bag, and felt the weight distribute the way it should when you're finally allowed to stand where you are already built to stand. The pouch of cartoons lay quiet in her locker, obsolete in a language the room had just stopped speaking. She stepped toward the brief with the steady cadence of a swimmer making peace with the surface, ready for whatever the tide would ask next. The brief was short and sharp, penned in Weathers ink, current still running hard off the bow. wind shifting in uneven breaths. Joint evolution on the water, swimmer insertion, casualty locate, hoist to the deck. No heroics, no spectators. Everyone wore the same face you wear before you do, work you respect. They walked out under a sky the color of gunmetal. Spray came in thin throws, the kind that feels like static on skin. A helo idled with its blades shouldering the air, crew chief pointing with 2 fingers, language of motions and timing. SEALs checked straps and fins with the lazy economy of people who have already burned off their nerves 100 times. Rachel stood inside the circle and did the same. Quiet hands, precise eyes, one more tug on a buckle that never complained. Briggs moved like someone who had both time and none to spare. He stopped with the chiefs and the XO just out of rotor wash, voice pitched to carry without steel. "The water will set the tempo. We play in tune," he said. Then a chin tip at Rachel that didn't need translation. "On you." She stepped into the helo's mouth, slid to her seat, clipped, and let the machine's thrum climb into her bones. Across from her, a T-man with river water eyes, older, lines at the corners that come from laughing in places you shouldn't, gave a small nod like 2 musicians recognizing a standard. The crew chief leaned in, hand on the stanchion. "Cast at the mark," he said. "Currents are grumpy." Rachel smiled with the corner of her mouth. "Me too." Over the deck, the ocean's face showed white seams where wind stitched it unevenly. The helo flared and held. The crew chief's hand cut and dropped. Rachel went out like a sentence landing where it belongs. Clean entry, no splashy punctuation, body folding and opening in the same breath. Cold closed over her head, and then she was back on the surface with the world loud in her ears. 2 dark shapes broke after her, fins knifing, gear disciplined. They swam off the ship's shadow, and the sea stopped pretending to be simple. The current didn't shove, it lied, pulling from the hip while tapping the shoulder. Rachel read it the way some people read lips in a crowd, corrective angles happening in her body before her mind had time to narrate them. She lifted her head once to check spacing. "On me," she called, calm. Measured. The teen fell into her slipstream because efficiency feels like relief when you're honest. The first objective, orange float, bobbing like a bad joke, loomed and slid sideways in the same instant. The younger SEAL on her right overcorrected by a hand's width and found his fin in a lover's quarrel with a loop of line that had no business being there. It caught, tugged, and turned his powerful kick into a clumsy reach. Panic is sneaky. It arrives dressed like hurry. Rachel saw it coming halfway through his exhale. She rolled and was on him before the water finished changing color around their bodies. One palm went flat on the back of his hand, firm, not forceful. "Murme," she said, voice in the register that teaches breathing to sit. His eyes met hers because authority is a tone before it is a rank. "Respira." "Uno, dos. Bien." She slipped her other hand along the line, found the bite, slid the fin's edge free with the thumb roll of someone who has argued with knots in the dark. "Despejado," she said, and the line lost interest in ruining their day. They made the float clean. Rachel turned her head, measuring the wind's new opinion, and pointed past it. "Shift." "There," she called. No wasted words. The second objective had been set to drift along a seam where 2 different moods of water met and lied about shaking hands. The current took you if you let it flatter you into thinking you were strong. Rachel angled the group across it instead, letting the river she had carried in her muscles set the geometry on a sea that believed itself unique. The older SEAL smiled against his mouthpiece. Recognition is a quiet joy. A whistle cut through the crew chief signaling the hoist run. The helo's belly slid into position, rotor wash flattening a patch of ocean into an obedient circle. Rachel lifted an arm, marking the target like she was pinning a map against wind. The strop hit water and walked toward them, line taut with aircraft will. She put it under the younger SEAL's arms first, checked his eyes again, saw that panic had packed its bag. "You're fine," she said, not as comfort but as command. He nodded, the big nod of a man who has been brought back into himself. The hoist took him. She rotated, drew the older teamman in with 2 fingers, clipped, signaled. He went up, steady as a confession. When the strop came down a 3rd time, she could feel the deck's nerves now, watching, recalibrating, remembering the paper that doesn't like to get wet. She slid in last, hands where they should be, body moving with the aircraft because cooperation keeps you whole. The deck rose to meet them. Boots on steel, rotor wash bullying hair and thoughts, the helo powered down to a friendlier volume. The crew shook water off like dogs, and then everyone looked without trying to look, the way a room looks when it knows it has just seen proof of something it had been arguing about in whispers. Briggs wasn't a man for ceremonials in the wrong places. He let silence say all the clever parts. Then he walked forward. The chiefs gathered themselves by instinct. The younger SEAL stood straighter than he meant to, jaw set in a line that admitted fear without naming it. "Good work," Briggs said to the circle and then to the carrier at large. On time, on rhythm. His eyes returned to Rachel and stayed. "That was the bend," he said. 2 men in the world would have understood what he meant, and one of them was standing 5 feet away. She nodded once. Where the river tells lies. Something passed over the faces nearest, like clouds dragging a different light. The loud chief's throat bobbed. Moore was there too, weight on his uninjured leg, watching the deck learn a new posture. Briggs placed his cap under his arm. He lifted his hand to his brow and held the salute. It should have been simple. A commander saluting a lieutenant in a wetsuit is just a gesture inked in the manual. But manuals don't write goosebumps. The hush that fell had shape to it. SEALs stepped in behind him and mirrored the motion, not for rank, not as theater, but because respect is a language you speak with your spine when you see your dialect in someone else. Rachel stood there with her taped wrist and the map folded flat in her bag and did not move for a full breath. Then she returned the salute crisp, exact, unembellished. Her eyes didn't shine. They steadied. She lowered her hand, and the deck felt different under everyone's boots. Briggs didn't turn to make it bigger. He kept his voice even, like stating weather. For clarity, Lieutenant Donovan worked embedded riverine with my teams. Brown water. Low light. She's a rescue swimmer who doesn't ask permission from panic. He let it sit. You could hear something unknot. The younger SEAL stepped forward, water still working its way off his gear. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had that raw edge that comes after you realize you were almost a story told by someone else. "Thanks." She shook her head once. Breathe. Rhythm over swing. A ghost of a smile pulled at his mouth because he would hear that sentence every time. Hurry, put on panic's coat. The chief who had said she'd drown found his courage in the only place it made sense now. He stepped in, not close enough to make it a confrontation, just close enough to let the words carry without wind stealing them. "Lieutenant," he said, and the rank sat right for the first time in his mouth. That was, well done. She spared him anything that would have made it worse. "We all have lanes," she said. "Mine has water." He took the mercy and nodded. The crew didn't cheer. Cheering would have made it smaller. Instead, people stood a half-inch taller and put tools back exactly where they belonged. Respect is contagious when it's earned. It doesn't need to go viral to change a room. Moore caught her eye on the way back to the gear cage. He lifted a hand in a halfway salute that wasn't regulation and meant more than most that were. She returned it with a nod. "You're good?" she asked. "Good," he said, and the word had a new backbone. In the locker bay, the pouch of cartoons waited where she had left it. She opened the locker, looked down at the stack without touching it, then closed the door. Not a rejection, not a ritual. Just a truth. The ledger had balanced itself. On the way to debrief, the junior sailor from the chow line jogged to match her pace. "Ma'am," he said, breath a little fast from nerves he couldn't name. "When the current felt wrong, how did you know to cut across?" She didn't slow. "Because flattery pulls you with it," she said. "Respect crosses and keeps its breath." He let out a surprised laugh, the kind that leaks out when relief figures out it's allowed, and fell in behind her. The debrief was efficient. Points were made, noted, owned. Briggs finished with, "We write with Weather's pen," Today we spelled our names right." Then he dismissed them, and the room did that thing rooms do when nobody wants to be the first to leave a moment. Rachel stepped into the corridor. Red lights blinked their metronome beat. Her wrist tape had softened from soak and work. She pressed the edge down with her thumb. She felt the trident's outline under her skin and thought of muddy bends that lied and the sea that told the truth if you listened in the right key. The ship vibrated with the same steady stubbornness it always had, but something in its pulse had learned a new note. A voice behind her. Briggs, not loud. "Donovan." She turned. He nodded toward the deck, toward the part of the world that never stops asking for proof. Next evolution, same lane. She didn't smile. "I'll be there before the rumor." He almost did. "I know." She moved on. Gear bag riding right on her shoulder, water whispering off her suit to the scuppers. Somewhere aft, laughter started and then corrected itself into conversation. The ocean pressed a palm against the hull, then let go. Respect isn't loud. It simply refuses to leave. That night, the carrier felt different. The storm had passed, the sea breathing slower now, but inside the steel walls, a quieter storm lingered, one made of memory, recalibration, and the weight of truth. Sailors moved with the same rhythm as always, checking lines, logging hours, eating in the chow line, but their eyes betrayed it. They had seen something they couldn't unsee. The woman they called Minnow had been someone else all along. Rachel lay in her rack, gear bag tucked at her feet, eyes open to the dim red light overhead. She didn't think of the salute itself, not the sharp hands raised, not even the weight of Briggs's words. What stayed with her was the silence. Silence has teeth. It swallows laughter, swallows ridicule, swallows the kind of easy mockery that once filled the air around her. She let it echo until sleep came in small pieces. At reveille, the ship groaned awake. Coffee steamed, steel boots struck decks, voices carried half asleep. Rachel fell into routine, gear checked, straps tested, fins inspected, strop folded and stowed. Competence was the only currency she ever carried, and she wasn't about to spend it differently now. Moore limped by her in the corridor, caught her eye, and gave that awkward salute again, the one that meant more than any regulation. She returned it with a nod, crisp, respectful, not indulgent. He smiled faintly, almost embarrassed, but walked taller afterward. Respect, once seated, grows in strange places. In the chow hall, no cartoons waited at her seat. No whispers drifted loud enough for her to hear. A petty officer who once called her kiddie pool now slid over his tray without a word when space ran tight. The absence of cruelty was almost louder than cruelty itself. People don't always admit change, but their silence confessed it. By mid-morning, Rachel found herself on the catwalk again, spray misting her face. She rested her hands on the cold rail and looked at the horizon. Gray, endless, unbending. She thought about her father's cracked palms, about her mother's prayers whispered to an empty kitchen. She thought about muddy rivers that taught her the difference between panic and patience. She thought about every folded cartoon in her pouch, each one proof of a time she carried their doubt without argument. Briggs found her there. He didn't announce himself. He never had to. His presence was weather-felt before it was seen. He leaned beside her on the rail, eyes scanning the water. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "You carried that alone." Rachel didn't look at him. "It was never about me. It was about the water. It demands what it demands. You meet it, or you don't." He studied her profile, then nodded. "Fair. But sailors aren't oceans. They choose. Yesterday, they chose to see you. Don't forget that." She let the spray answer for her, salty drops on her lips. Finally, "Respect isn't loud, sir. It reveals itself when it must." Briggs smiled with one corner of his mouth, the kind of smile a man gives when he hears his own lesson spoken back at him. Then they learned something worth keeping. He straightened, adjusted his cap. "Next evolution's yours. Make sure the sea doesn't have to remind them again." Rachel turned to face him. "It won't." He left with the same quiet he brought. That evening she opened her pouch of cartoons one last time. Fish, bubbles, silly captions, childish drawings. She stacked them neatly, pressed them flat, and slid them to the bottom of her sea bag. Not as trophies, not as wounds, as reminders. Proof that she endured without needing to shout. Before lights out, the junior sailor she'd studied days ago appeared at her hatch. His voice was uncertain, but it carried. "Ma'am, when they saluted you, why didn't you look proud?" Rachel studied him for a long moment. "Because pride is loud," she said. "And the sea doesn't hear loud, it hears steady." He didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway. Some truths take years to ripen. Rachel lay back in her rack. The tape at her wrist loosened slightly, the trident beneath pressing faint against her skin. She didn't uncover it. She didn't need to. Symbols mean nothing without readiness. And tomorrow, the ocean would ask the same question it always did. "Are you ready?" She closed her eyes, steady heartbeat matching the carrier's pulse beneath her. The answer had never changed. Yes. Because real strength isn't loud, it's quiet. Steady, undeniable when the moment comes. And that was the legacy she carried. Not the salute, not the silence, not even the respect reversal. Her legacy was readiness. And the water knew it.